Hello, everyone. My name is Kamille Dawkins. I'm going to be your host this week for Thank You Five. I'm the artistic director of Strawdog Theater. I'm going to go around and introduce everyone in our panel today. We've got Lalak Lopez Waterman, a lighting and media designer. Megan Riley, a lighting and media designer. Lindsay Jones, a sound designer. And director Lily Ann Brown. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. Before we start today, we're going to do our land acknowledgement. We'd like to take this moment to acknowledge the land that we occupy today. Before European invasion, the Chicagoland area was home to the Council of the Three Fires, composed of the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, as well as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, Fox, Kickapoo, and Illinois nations. We honor the Native communities of the past and the 65,000 Native people living in Chicago today. It is our goal that through this acknowledgement, we and the Chicago community can begin to work towards equity, healing, and the celebration of Indigenous people. Thank you all so much for joining us on our very first episode of Thank You Five. This show is meant to bring theater artists together from across the globe to have conversations about live theater and digital storytelling with a spirit of gratitude and innovation. Our first question for this lovely panel is, what is theater? I know that's a big question, but does anyone want to start us off with their thoughts? Yes, go ahead, Lalak.
So you're right. It's a huge question. And so, but for me, I think it's a combination of ritual, and community and bringing people together, and also entertainment, so how can we be in the same room? And that definition has changed a bit over the last couple of years, but how can we be in the same room and have the same experience and experience this sort of same stories that our fellow audience members are also experiencing, and the ritual that comes with it.
Beautiful. I mean, I definitely agree with that. I know that, yeah, ever since the pandemic and having to be isolated, it's definitely made us rethink exactly what all of that means. But I really like what you say about, the ritual aspect of it and people coming together. That seems to be one of the core things that a lot of people think. Lilian?
Yeah, I absolutely love ritual being part of that definition. I also, for me, and this is probably going to be controversial for the evening since we're talking about digital representations and all of that, but for me, liveness is essential. Now, we might be redefining live, but part of what separates theater from other art forms for me is that it's human body powered storytelling that is live, for people to experience.
I can agree with both definitions just given. I think that I have a much more, esoteric definition, and that I think that theater is a time-based medium where something happens and there is a performer and an audience. It's live, it's happening right now, enough so that there's a give and take between the two, so that you can't have like a film be called theater. But the definitions of live and audience and performer are really wide open for me. There's very little that I won't say is theater.
I'm going to have to take the opposite tack. Not that I don't agree with all three of these people who are amazing and really smart, but I'm not terribly esoteric, unfortunately. So I will just say that for me, theater is storytelling, and the magic of it is watching a human in front of you enact a story and being able to tap into their emotions. And I feel like what has kept theater alive for this many years is the ability to identify with a human acting out a story in front of you and be able to connect with them emotionally and hopefully learn something or reevaluate something as a result of that experience. And that's as much as I really ask for in theater, honestly. Everything else is just gravy after that for me.
I find myself with theater thinking back to, like, I guess, Greek times, of how they used to like all come together for a marathon of days, just going as a community and just going through this catharsis with each other, how it was just like a thing that brought everyone together. And the whole idea around storytelling and how it's like a vehicle for human beings to continue to learn things about each other and learn about how would you handle this situation if you were in that situation, seeing other people's point of views. So I guess there's like these things that you get from storytelling, that you get from theater, that kind of are like the heart of theater, even when it's applied in different ways, if that makes any sense. Like, I know, like, during the pandemic, I've been a part of some shows that I would technically consider theater, even though they weren't necessarily presented in person live, just because of the way they felt visceral and intimate, and really like brought people into a suspension of disbelief.
That's interesting. Sorry. Do we raise our hands? I forgot. It's interesting that you mentioned suspension of disbelief, because until I started attending immersive theater, I never experienced that at all. And once I was in Sleep No More, which was my first piece of immersive theater, and certainly not my best piece of immersive theater that I've experienced, once I saw that, I was really caught up in the idea that this was the whole world and there was nothing else. And I was actually talking to Hecate, as much as that sounds crazy. But before, when I would see theater, it was very much like, oh, I really like that set change. I like how that's coming in time with the music and in time with the light cue, and how everything's just, and so I would watch the set changes and watch the light cues and not so much the performances. It was a very technical exercise for me.
It's really funny that you mentioned the last couple of years, because during the pandemic, I mostly pivoted to doing audio dramas, which was a way to make a living. And I did participate in a few sort of Zoom theater type experiences, but I found myself again and again being drawn back to audio drama, because I think the reason why audio drama is a compelling substitute for theater, although not a full substitute by any means, but a reasonable facsimile of it, is because as a listener of an audio drama, as an audience member, your imagination must be engaged in order to receive the story. As things are happening, you're sort of visualizing and imagining what things look like. And I feel like that's a necessary component for being an audience member in theater. When you walk into a theater, for example, that the set on that stage is not a functional piece of architecture, right? Like you immediately know that. And yet, as you become an audience member and become immersed in that story, you're allowing yourself to fill in the blanks of what's beyond what you see and what's beyond the lives that are being presented in terms of their backstories and their history and what they're like as people. And so the engagement of the audience's imagination is a necessary component for both theater and also, in my opinion, audio drama. And it's less like that in immersive theater, and I'll be controversial for a moment, or not immersive theater, but Zoom theater, because it's all there in front of you. You see everything and it's on a flat screen. So it's you're not having to fill in as much with your imagination, because you see what you see and you hear what you hear. And so to me, I that's how I learned during the pandemic that the audience's imagination is a key component to creating exciting theater.
I think we can.
Well, now it's like that leaves me to kind of go, what is Zoom theater? Like, what are you talking about? Because like a lot of the stuff that I saw, I'm like, no, everything was left to the imagination. There's just like heads floating in blue space, and there's nothing but, nothing but imagine. Everything is left to the imagination, other than like, here's some people's faces. I disliked it very much, but I'm not going to say it didn't leave anything to the imagination. I did a project. I basically had an assignment to do a project that I still feel like I'm working this over in my mind. I'm still really noodling. How can I do? I want to do it again. I want to do it better. I want to keep working toward some sort of solution, because this is not the first time or the last time that we are going to have to come up with these solutions, like, unfortunately. And I had to do this show, I did the show at Goodman. They had a series called the Live Series. And essentially the setup was like one of those NBC Live musicals, or basically like Saturday Night Live. I guess NBC really sort of has a lock on the whole like live from New York thing. But we had 3, sometimes 4 cameras. We had the option of a static one, but 3, operated cameras, 3 camera operators. We turned the Owen Theater at the Goodman into a sound stage, and each were assigned a play. And the funny thing is, the play that I did was the least form of a play. It's actually a play that was originally conceived as audio, sort of like a mixtape. So it was very vignette-like. But what I didn't want was for the project I just didn't want it to be like a glorified archival. Like, that's what it felt like everyone was doing, was like, okay, you're going to do a play over there on a set, the camera's here, we're going to record it. And like, ooh, what's special about this? Maybe we'll get some close-ups, or we'll have a fun angle because we've got these camera people. And I just didn't feel like they were being like really like used, like really, I don't know. I just was really kind of tortured with how is this theater? What can I do that if you're sitting at home, even though we are live, we are downtown on Dearborn, and we are doing this live and it's being streamed to you, how do I make it feel like that? And so I did a lot of things that I think were cool and that I think work. I don't know though. I feel like I'm working toward it. I incorporated a lot of movement. I let the camera go backstage and moved us from backstage to onto the stage. I made sure that sometimes the shots showed not just like the green screen, but like the side of the green screen, or like beyond the green screen, like this is a green screen and these are people standing in front of it. I did things sometimes like, oh, we're going to pan over here and watch this costume change and then go back. Like, just so it was like, this is happening right now. You're in a theater and you're at home, but this is happening right now. And so I don't know, I felt like that went some way toward, but like, was that theater? I'd like to think so, but I don't know.
I think one thing that is important about that, Lillian, is that we need to really explore what the medium itself does, as opposed to just trying to put a play on. Like, I saw one Zoom production during the pandemic, which was Katie Pearl doing The Method Gun with Wesleyan College. And I thought it was just brilliant, because they actually figured out how to arrange the squares of everybody's heads in such a way that so they could do interesting things like pass things from one to another. and, really interact with each other. And the other thing I remember during the pandemic, I saw a couple of magic shows. I hate magicians. I'm just going to say that right now. There was this one show, and this guy wanted you to pick like a red card or a black card. And so I picked red, and then I wanted to change my mind and go to the black card. And the guy started arguing with me over Zoom in front of the rest of the audience. Like, are you sure you want this? Do I need to pick somebody else, Megan? Did you, and I just, that sort of like back and forth between me and him made it more a legit form of theater, because that's how I knew it was live.
I think that we have to then, this brings us back to the question of what is theater, because I kind of disagree a lot with what some of you are saying. And so because I think rehearsal is a big part of theater, and rehearsal can happen in a lot of different ways. And one performance that we did that was during the pandemic that was not, didn't end up being completely Zoom, except rehearsal was, because the actors could not be in the same room with each other because of the pandemic. And so one of the things that the director did, which I thought was really, really interesting, is he let breaks happen on Zoom so that there was a banter that was happening between the actors, and the timing of jokes and the timing of, Zoom has like 150 seconds or 250 seconds of latency, milliseconds, not seconds, milliseconds of latency. So they got into their bones that particular latency. And so the humor started to blossom out of that kind of banter in that time. And it was really remarkable to see. And we ended up doing the show with 3 of the performers, which included a puppeteer and two live actors in one building, and then another actor in a different state. And so we sort of combined all that together and turned it into something that did not feel anything like Zoom. And I've done other shows that didn't feel anything like Zoom. I don't think, like you said, squares. To me, that I get, I don't want to. If I'm using squares in a show that is being presented live, that means I'm doing it ironically for, to talk about Zoom being annoying in that way, so not because that's the only way that we can do it, and so I think that there is plenty of room for imagination. There's plenty of room for liveness, and there's plenty of room for amazing interaction between the participants of a piece of theater, if it's not the traditional version inside of a thing. And there's just as much possibility of it being really, really bad as there is on stage. And the other thing is that our medium, theatrical medium, has pushed the envelope since the beginning of time. And we, during the pandemic, as an industry, we didn't make films. We made theater pieces, and some of them failed and some of them didn't. But we kept going. And so I find it to be almost heartening that we tried so much during that period of time to continue to work. And yes, there were some that were bad. I mean, that's absolutely true. 100% agree with that. But I do think that there was some innovation that happened, and some breaking of the mold about being locked in by geographical. I mean, I was designing things from afar. There were shows I did there was a lighting designer in Brooklyn while I was in Maryland. I mean, there was things that were happening that just broke the mold in a way that I think was really important for our world. Not our world as a larger whole, but I mean like theatrical world. What does that mean? I think it means that the stuff that we do live in a theater on the room will be affected and changed forever, and some for the, because we know how to do things in a different way now, and we know how to think about things in a different way. Design meetings are completely transformed. Instead of not having them until the very last minute, we can have them whenever we need to, and really look at things and look at and talk through things and work through things if that's set up that way. So theater is not just the end point, but also the beginning point. And the time we rehearse and discuss and debate and have conversations like this one.
Yeah, I really like that point. I know that I tend to not think about theater as like, the whole process. It's not just the performance that comes out at the end or just what the audience is receiving. It's everything from the concept to getting the team together to all of the meetings and the rehearsals. I think probably like for a lot of people during the pandemic when they had to come up with these new ways of working together, I think one of the reasons why we even wanted to keep doing stuff, not just to like keep the lights on, but also because we just wanted to connect with our audiences, also bled over into like wanting to come together and work with other artists. Half of or majority of theater is the artists who want to make nice things for other people. So us getting to play together is an aspect I don't really think about when it comes to like what is theater, because I guess there's another side to it of theater is actually us coming together to make the thing as opposed to the end product and what the audience is necessarily receiving. Yeah.
I'm trying to not talk too much because I could talk a lot about this and I want to not be interrupting all the time, but I also do a lot of research in virtual reality performance. And because I'm a professor, I have to do research in addition to creative work. My big research project is in trying to recreate one of Adrian Howells's pieces in VR in order to see if we can figure out how to get the same reactions from the audience, the same connection, the same empathy, the same, stirring of memories and all that Howells's pieces did when he was doing them one-on-one with people. They're very well documented, the audience responses, and Howells sometimes would run them as experiments. So I'm trying to do the same thing in hopes that we can find new ways to connect virtually with audience members so that it is more effective, a form of theater. And that was basically, that idea was born out of the pandemic, out of seeing people say this isn't theater or this is a lesser version of theater.
Well, did anyone have any last thoughts on specifically what is theater before we move over into our question section of the evening? No? All right. Well, I've got our first question for us here. It's from Allie. She's asking, how do you see emerging technologies impacting your work as a designer, like AR and VR and AI and all the other letters?
I think they give us new tools to work with. I think that if we don't try to innovate and use them in performance, and not just, to present a Zoom show with squares or to have like Hamlet presented in virtual reality for a sitting audience, but to use them in their actual, like with their actual potential in mind, that there's an interactivity to them, and find new and innovative ways to use them within the context of live performance. I think that that's how we need to be looking at it.
I think, there was a time in early American theater where the idea of a sound designer was incredibly taboo. I mean, it wasn't a thing. There was a person that enforced sound.
It's not even that long ago.
Yeah. And then take that forward to projection design, and then take that forward to what we just had a conversation about when it came to Zoom theater during the pandemic. So every time that there is a new way of doing something, there is a necessary ebb and flow between this is the worst thing ever to, oh my God, this is the best thing since sliced cheese, which neither of those things are true, right? You can't just save money by doing projection design, because you still need scenic design. You still need, it's an addition. It's another thing to add to the experience as a whole. So when it comes to the technologies that the questioner asks about, I think we have to try stuff out. Otherwise, we'll never know if it can be something that can inform our work and our practice in theater. Because, like, one thing that I did recently was combine Unreal Engine allowed me to then make a set, which I had connections into with DMX that I could then turn lights on and off in that set and have that be a background for somebody that was playing music in this case, that then was also connected to a theater that people were watching, a movie theater in this case, were watching what they were seeing, but then we had lights in there. And so to combine all of those things up so that it doesn't feel like any one thing, like it doesn't feel like AI, it doesn't feel like augmented reality, it does, it feels like a combination of all those things, and then therefore can be more theatrical and make an impact.
As a sound designer, I spend a tremendous amount of time justifying my existence. And I really believe that a large portion of that is due to the fact that you can't see it. You can see sets, lights, costumes, projections. You cannot see audio. And so therefore, when a producer spends money, they want to be able to point to something on the stage and say, you see that? I paid for that. And there it is. And with sound, it's not. So I spend a lot of time sort of justifying technology that no one ever sees and very few people understand. But I really do believe, actually, that technology is how we attract and connect with future generations of theater goers. I really believe that we have a continuously growing, savvy population of people out there who are able to specify, advanced audio settings on their earphones, on their stereo systems, on their TVs, in the movie theaters. And we owe it to ourselves to be able to not only keep up with those technologies, but hopefully improve upon them in service of still maintaining our commitment to the idea of a human being communicating on stage to everyone else. There's a level of authenticity to theater that I really believe is not replaceable in any other art form. And yet, at the same time, we can certainly use technology to enhance that performance in many different ways. I mean, when it comes to new technologies, I think that for me, the thing I want to be able to do is, if the show is about the technology, then, in my opinion, it's a failure. The show has to be about a story, and the technology is always in service of that story and telling that story. So I think we just have to be really disciplined in how we employ these things in a way that really stays true to, the reason why theater is special, and yet at the same time, be constantly looking for ways to say to younger people out there, like, hey, you like video games? Video games have these qualities. We have these qualities too, and there are things in there that you can identify with. And I'm totally not above tricking people into coming to theater. You know what I mean? I'm absolutely, I really believe that deception is completely acceptable, because once they're there, they'll hopefully have a connection, and they'll be willing to stay, and they'll be willing to forgive us for tricking them into being there. Because I really do think that it can change people's hearts and minds, and that's super important. So I think that's where I come down for technology.
With suspension of disbelief comes suspension of anger.
Here's hoping. Suspension of fighting back. Yes.
I don't know, I've been plenty willing to fight back in theater settings, I guess, even the ones where I've suspended my disbelief successfully. I also wanted to just comment, since we're talking about things like Zoom theater or whatever, or virtual reality, that one of the things that this does that is often overlooked is it provides access to communities and to people who don't necessarily get to go to theater. And I'm thinking specifically about disabled people, because I am a disabled person. And to me, that's really important. I want to be able to let other people who can't physically get into a theater to see it. And I know that immersive theater is completely antithetical to disability. But there's also a lot of communities that don't necessarily get to travel to Broadway to see a show. Being able to see a show digitally in some way provides access to them.
Yeah, I can't speak as a designer about the impact of technology, because I'm not a designer, but I wanted to actually mention the impact on my wallet, because that's real, and it was kind of scary, because a lot of the virtual work of the past couple years was we were in our homes doing this work, and I was doing just as much work as I normally do. I was putting in the same amount of hours, and I don't know if this happened to y'all too, but like I was putting in those hours and getting paid 10% of what I normally get paid. Like 10%. And yeah, everybody was broke. We were all broke, but it seemed to me like when I was asking about it, the talks with producers that I had were very much like, they really thought like, oh, you're in your house, so you're not really working. And we already, just like you were talking about, Lindsay, we already have enough trouble justifying what the hell we do. And they were literally telling me like, but you're in your kitchen. So like, and I'm like, so me showing up physically and doing the same thing for the same amount of time makes it real. And so, that really made me think a lot about the impact of technology, because if the people with the doggone pocketbooks have a heart, I'm worried about their suspension of disbelief as much as anybody else, because it's our livelihood. So this is kind of me not talking about the art side, but the work side.
But you know what is crazy? There was a big problem with producers thinking that I do lighting design as a living. I mean, like when they say, well, why, I don't even want to take the conversation down, but like they say these things where it's like, no, you don't actually understand. This is what I do for a living. And it's not a hobby. And I love it. And I do it with like all my soul, but we ain't joking.
All right, I've got another question for us. How does the performance space influence your design or your concept of the piece? Do you ever conceptualize a piece and then have to radically rethink it because of the venue? Yes, I see yeses all around.
I mean, I know I do. I mean, what's been amazing, and just to connect to technology, is that in the last 15 years, sound design has moved to a computer program that is ostensibly super flexible. So whereas at the beginning of my career, if I wanted to change cues, I would take a note, I would go home, I would change it overnight, I'd come back the next day and play it, and it'd be like, how do you like it? If they said, that's not it, then I'd have to go home that night and do it again. And I would do that over and over again. And now I have the ability to change things on the fly, no matter how complicated. I can rewrite music on a fly. I can do anything. So I've taken that to the natural extension, which is that in the way that I usually create designs, I make them completely modular, which means that they are essentially, if I'm writing a piece of music, I'll write it in blocks so that they intersect with one another so I can crossfade things in. I also create, stems. So if a director says, I wish there was less guitar, I can be like, here you go, let me pull down that guitar or whatever that is, So, and that is also, I constantly do that in terms of the space. If I walk into the room, and it's inevitable, I will say it's very rare that I will listen to a show, the cues on my headphones, and then walk into the space and it sounds exactly the same. It almost never is like that at all. And so then you have to radically change it just because of the architecture or because of the sound system or because of, that they had to put the speakers behind a lighting post or whatever. There's a million reasons of things that happen, and you just have to, roll with it. And so being able to walk into a space with my artistic performance being as flexible as an actor's artistic performance, where they receive direction and they can make a change, I can receive direction and make a change in the same way, has completely transformed my career. And now I basically operate under the principle that I'm going to walk in and be constantly shaping what I'm doing all the way up till opening night. And that's become an incredibly freeing part of my process and a really inspiring part of my process, because I really do feel like the collaboration with others is what really shapes it into its final form.
Hear, hear.
I think that, sorry, go on.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, probably similar to things that other designers are thinking, that we always consider the space in some form or another, considering that we have to look at sight lines. Is this projection even going to be seen from the back of the house or from the side of the house? What kind of lights do I need to use if the throw is this far away? So as designers, we're always thinking about that. And when I think about the use of digital technology or new, I should say, emerging technologies in theater, I find it difficult to imagine doing them in some kind of like giant concert hall venue. It feels like something that requires more intimacy than that in order for it to be effective.
Oftentimes, you'll have one thought of how a show should look, and pretty much you've done the work with the director and the design team have done the work on the concept and the ideas of what wants to be presented. So you can walk into a venue, if it's the first time you've ever been there, and be like, oh, there's this one part of this venue that will really serve this concept. This happened to me recently on a production of Glory Denied that I was, which is an opera about the longest held Vietnam vet. And I walked in to this big auditorium at University of Tennessee, and I was like, lots of problems with this space. And then, black curtains with fullness. And so then I looked at it, and I was worried about the orchestra being too loud or not loud enough. I was thinking also, I like to try to think not just about my discipline, but about all the disciplines. If I can see an issue, I'd like to try to bring it up. But I was worried a little bit about acoustics. So we moved the curtains out of the way, and there were 3 blacked out windows back there that had a little bit of glow coming through them, because it was daylight. And I was like, oh, that is really interesting looking. And I think it would match the feeling of this show in an amazing way. And then I said, well, what happens at night? And there's massive, I mean, there was a football stadium right outside. So there's massive amounts of light everywhere. So there was always going to be that glow. And I'm like, let's use this. And then I had to sort of campaign the rest of the team for this and check with the conductor to make sure that he thought that the acoustics would sort of line up better or worse. You know, I didn't want to throw anybody under the bus because I like the windows, you know what I mean? But so I think oftentimes when the conceptual work is done and you walk in and you can lock into something about the venue that will elevate that, it is great. Sometimes the venue will change the concept as well, which is also good, but can be a little bit disconcerting.
Megan, I was just thinking about what you were saying about intimacy, and when it comes to venues, I did a crazy venue last summer. I worked at the Muni, which is this huge outdoor, it's 11,000 seats. It's essentially a stadium. And I've never done anything like that before. And in terms of projections, they have ginormous LEDs, to which, and I've seen them used every kind of way. And I tend to try to be really like minimal and subtle with projections because, you know, I've seen it use this kind of a crutch. And like, I want to tell the story, and it's not about, you know, the projections are supposed to support the production, but what do you do when you have to worry about people that are in the back of a stadium, and to them, the actors look like ants, but the projections are nice and big and easy for them to see, right? And you want that intimacy. It was almost like we had to think about, like, go back to the time of the Greeks and go like, okay, we're in the amphitheater. What can we do to, like, you know, how do we tell this story that everyone is feeling it? And I just thought it was really challenging, you know, because I'm just used to like, yes, yay, songs and dances. But I had to really think about those people. Like, I want them to have a great time. They give 1,500 free seats away a night, but those people are all the way in the back. And they've got their coolers and their kids, and they're kind of kicking it like it's Ravinia, and like they're getting kind of a concert. But I want them to have a really great, I want them to get a story and a play too. And so, yeah, like venue, like to think about, like, damn, everybody's really far away was wild.
All right, I've got a new question for us. Can you talk about Isadora in your theater work?
I'm sorry, is that somebody I know? Probably.
It's actually someone I know.
Oh, is it really? I just get told a lot that Isadora is an old technology and we shouldn't be using it anymore. And I just love the possibilities. Like, I really truly believe that Isadora could probably solve world peace if you could just build enough actors to, you know, execute all the things. Like, it's just this crazy ass program. And I did a show. It was like in a small theater in Minneapolis several years ago. We used Isadora, and it was all like the projections had to be timed exactly with certain motions of the actors, so that, like, you would have a puppet's hand that was going to move a letter across the table, and the projection was the letter moving across the table, and so you couldn't let the hand move until that hand moved. And it was just really cool the way that it kind of layered on all of these things in order to oh yes, Isadora is this like projection. Well, it's projection and sound, maybe lighting. I'm not sure. No. Okay.
No sound. All I do is trigger it. That's all I do.
All you do is trigger it.
Yeah.
It does have some sound, but it's not very good.
Okay. it's a way of just creating different, like sort of like live mixing your projections. And it looks a lot like the kind of programming things that you might learn programming in, or it looks a lot like what sound engineers interact with, but it is really just about being able to trigger specific commands at specific times so that your work is interacting with the live performance. And you can also hook up motion sensing cameras to it, things that sense body heat on stage, so that like, you know, if my cat walked on stage, maybe a certain light cue would be triggered or a certain projection cue would be triggered based on that. And I'm sorry, I'm a big fan.
Yeah,
go ahead.
It's called by the company a creativity server rather than a media server, which some folks might think is a little over the top, but I think it's a great way to look at it because it's a blank slate. When you open it up, you can't intuitively figure out how this could make a show. And so it's not linear. There's more linear tools that have come to it now, but the linearity of it is what is the best part about it, because it means that you can bring things in that are triggered by actors. You can do things that are sort of combined in multiple layers. A great example of what I'm talking about is I do a lot of opera, and in opera we always have super titles, and sometimes we want that to be integrated into the larger look and larger design of the show. If there's projection design, and you don't want just like another projector with bad video black and PowerPoint, and so you can send from a separate operator computer, you can send OSC in with each of the lines and then put those anywhere. For example, on the Gloria Night I was talking about, the director wanted a super title for each character to be in different parts of the stage. So we were able to build an actor that could look for prefixes on each one of the super title lines, and then send the super titles to the appropriate part of the stage. Those kinds of things, and keeping that outside of the cue stack, making that completely non-interjecting into the linear action of the show that you're making as a projections designer is outstanding. It's not something that is as easy to do in some of the other platforms.
And when we're talking about actors in Isadora, they're like one kind of component of it, not the actor that's on stage. But if you build an actor in Isadora, it's like the thing that picks up the signal and sends it to this camera or whatever it is. I really like how I've seen it used where within dance, where if a dancer moves to a certain part of the stage, this sound cue might be triggered or that video cue might be triggered, so that you're not actually operating it, but that it's programmed in to respond to the dancer's movements.
All right, here is our final question for the evening. What is the strangest place/location you've done theater in?
I held off talking about this because I saw the question ahead. And because the other question was, how does a venue affect the work that you do? Well, I was asked to do a show in the catacombs of the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. And held about, at the very, very most, 90 people in terms of audience. And then I had to run like a little generator, and then I had a light board in one of the crypts, and it was just like, it was insane, and it really did affect the way to make the design. And it was the director on one of the shows I did there had a really, really big fear of spiders, arachnophobia, and at one point she just let out the biggest blood curdling scream, and we all jumped because it's very dark in there, even when you have a lighting designer.
I also have done a show in a cemetery. I did Hamlet at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. the concept that this theater company came up with is that the ghost of Hamlet's father was this massive statue, which is actually in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, which is the statue of Johnny Ramone, guitar player of the Ramones. So we sort of had this we had dramatically lit statue of Johnny Ramone, who is playing a guitar in the statue. And the biggest problem we had was that there were these feral, like thousands of feral cats who lived on the premises of this thing. And so we got in the habit of having to not just put away all of our equipment, but actually coil up all of the cables, because the cats would chew through the cables all night long if we left them out there. But that's actually not the craziest place I've done a show. I did do a show in New York in an abandoned bank, and I thought it was going well. And then on the second day, the sound engineer quit the show. They just decided to leave. And that was when, on a 10-minute break, we discovered there was a homeless man living in the bathroom of this theater. And we were so desperate, we made that person our sound engineer. And they were actually pretty good. I think they actually had a pretty good career after that. So we wound up hiring this guy who lived in the bank, and then he became our sound person.
Did he have a history of doing sound design, or was he just
No,
really?
I have a long history actually of getting people with no experience whatsoever and then being like, here you go. In fact, I'll tell you one more story and then I promise I'm going to stop. I was doing a show at a theater in Chicago, which I won't name. And, I showed up for the first day of tech and they were like, hey, just so you know, we don't have a sound engineer yet. And so I did the first day of tech where I, in addition to writing and composing all the cues, I also ran all the cues. And I said to them at the end of that first day, I said, listen, you're going to need to find somebody to run these cues because I can't do it through the whole show. And they said, don't worry, we'll figure it out. So that night they go to the bar and they're in a bar and they're like, what are we going to do? We got to find a sound engineer. And the bartender was like, what do you need? And we're like, we just need somebody to hit play on a CD player and just like adjust some volume levels on a soundboard. And this woman who's the bartender was like, well, my brother was just thrown out of school, so I bet he would do it. And they're like, great. So they bring him down and I have this conversation with him where I say, okay, tell me what you know about sound. And he's like, well, I have a stereo. And I said, all right. And so I was like, do you know what this is? And he's like, no. And I said, okay, this is a soundboard. Let's start over. So I literally I explained to him every concept of how sound works in a pro audio sound system. And I trained him to do it. And by the time we got to opening night, he was doing a good job. And I felt like, okay, this person's doing great. So I left him, the show ran, it opened, it closed, everything was fine. I go back to that theater 6 months later to do the next show. And I say, hey, is this person going to be back again? Because, I thought they did a great job last time. And they said, actually, they've got another job. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah, they're now working at the Goodman. And at that point, even I hadn't worked at the Goodman. And this other person, which gives you an indication as to how difficult it is to find trained people to do these jobs. So I'm literally I'm accepting applications basically from homeless people and people who've been thrown out of university. That's what I've been doing.
I have also not worked at the Goodman, if we're keeping score here. I would say the weirdest place I've ever done the show is the entire country of Portugal, meaning that the show started in Lisbon and then went on a train through other parts of the country, and it ended up in this middle of nowhere place that where I was running the show from. And it took 3 days, and there was one audience member.
I mean, the only thing I can think of really is I did a play in an abandoned mall. Like it was like a festival and they just had us down in these abandoned storefronts just doing plays, and people were just rotating in and out. And we just kept doing the plays every 15 minutes, just going around in rotation. It's also just fun to be in abandoned malls, I think.
I feel like probably everyone here at some point did something in a gymnatorium. And if you've ever done theater in a gymnatorium, I think you can do theater anywhere after that.
Yeah, talk about a space where you have to, where there's a lot of suspension of disbelief. Acoustics
and
alone.
the very worst lighting and acoustics you could ever have.
There's a whole genre of theater buildings that are like made for multiple purposes, and they're really good for none of those purposes.
Yep.
They're equally dissatisfying for any of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think that's a different conversation on who designs theaters in the first place, and why don't they ever talk to us?
The individual tools of a Swiss Army knife suck compared to the individual tools that they're trying to replicate.
True. Those are terrible scissors.
I think I'm being told that we have time for another question. So I'm going to throw this one in here. What is the tool or piece of equipment or software that has not been invented / realized that would make your life easier as a designer? So what has not been invented that would make your life easier as a designer? Lindsay, go ahead.
I'm going to make a plea for this. Teleportation. That's what I need. I'm desperate for teleportation because I need to be in many places at the same time, including at my house. And teleportation is the only option. That's what I want.
I need a 3D, I don't know what they're called, visualization system that actually looks like what happens on stage.
There's some stuff, but none of it's good yet, that actually can record blocking and or choreography. There's some stuff, but nothing that I'd find useful quite yet.
You know, as somebody said, there will be times when we can't gather in the same room again in the future. And so one of the things that is probably as likely as Lindsay's pick is zero to low latency video teleconferencing, which is not actually physically possible. But I mean, it is in some ways to be faster than what we know here on Zoom. But it's expensive. But I wish for that, because I think there would be ways to also integrate some of these kinds of technologies into an actual piece of theater that is for an audience in the room. But what I learned, and I've been meaning to say this and keep forgetting, the biggest thing I learned in the pandemic is how important instantaneous reaction is to the theatrical experience. That latency is kind of the death of that magic that we think of when we think about theater.
Yeah, I can't really come up with any invention that I think would be very useful other than, I don't know. I always think about how the number one thing I want is just an easy way to communicate everything to everyone on the team all the time without having to worry that everyone's going to see it. I know there are like some systems that they have that already do that, but I don't know. Something that isn't so cumbersome, doesn't require that you download a whole app so that everyone can just get the same information. All right. Well, those are our questions for the evening. I'm going to go around and see if anyone wants to plug anything as you say goodnight. Megan, thank you for joining us. Anything you want to plug?
Sure. I'm going to Focus Lights tomorrow for Finder in the North Star at Children's Theater of Madison, which opens next week.
Lillian?
I feel ashamed because I couldn't tell you when it opens. But I'm doing a play called Mothers at the Gift Theater. And that's opening in like May.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lily. Lalak?
I believe that I'm someone who's not in the same geographical area as the rest of the folks here, but if you are in the Roanoke, Virginia area, in a few weeks, we'll be doing the Glory Denied that I spoke about on this program. Is remounting there at Opera Roanoke, and I highly recommend, even if you don't see this one, if you ever see an opportunity to go to that show, I highly recommend it. It's pretty powerful, and the way that it's built is that there are 4 singers, old Alice and young Alice, and old Tom and young Tom, and Thompson, and that's the same person in 2 parts of their lives, and the way that they interact and sort of spin around the story of this thing. And if you don't see this one, see it someday.
Thank you. And Lindsay?
I'm currently in Indianapolis at Indiana Repertory, getting ready to start tech on Oedipus. I have 2 productions, The Three Musketeers and Romeo and Juliet, that are currently touring with the acting company around the United States. I believe they're in Iowa tonight. I have 2 audio dramas, The Winter's Tale from Next Chapter Podcast, episode 8 comes out this Friday, and Marvel Wastelanders from Marvel, which is currently available on Apple and Spotify.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us for Thank You 5. Thank you to our audience for joining us. I'm going to do a little plug for Strawdog, which is you can always donate to us or become a recurring donor at strawdog.org. We also have an event coming up this Monday called Canine Valentine. It's going to be a fun day at Club Lago where we have haikus and songs and missed connections. So if you want to learn more about that, just go to strawdog.org. Thank you all again so much for joining us, and have a good night.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.